Okay, so hi everyone. This talk will be based on the talk we presented at Dev Connect, but I feel like I've got a little more time to delve into a few aspects this time round. So there'll be some new content and also a new set of slides that Rachel well, she adapted the slides I use, and they're much more fun and interesting. So thanks to Rachel for that. That's great. So Interep. Interep is anti-civil service. Next slide, please. So our aims with Interep, I think that first line should say like bridge identity to Ethereum or something. We're providing a bridge from digital identity sources to the Ethereum world. We plan to we integrate with sources of digital identity, and we add to that privacy guarantees using the Semaphore framework. Next slide. Okay. Okay. Well, perhaps before we go into this, I should talk a bit about identity management systems. So what we're trying to do with identity management, if you read the literature, you'll come across two terms. One is unicity, which is that an identifier is associated with one person, and anytime you use that identifier, it's going to refer to that same person and never a different person. The other term is singularity, which is the property that if you have a person, they have one unique identifier, and they never use another identifier. So think about that in real world things we're familiar with. If your name has good properties of singularity, in other words, the name in your password, you will always use that name. If we exclude like nicknames and pseudonyms and so on, your name has good singularity properties, but poor unicity properties, because especially if you've got a fairly common name, there are hundreds of thousands of John Smiths in the world, and even if you've got an unusual name in a population of billions, there's a fair chance of a collision. So names have singularity but not unicity. And think of something else we're familiar with, Ethereum addresses. They have good unicity. An Ethereum address is very likely, nearly always controlled by a single person. So unicity, if we have an Ethereum address, we can be fairly confident that there's a unique person behind that address. But they have poor singularity properties, because one person can create hundreds or thousands of addresses. So if you have an address, there's no guarantee whatsoever that you're uniquely identifying a person, because they could just create another address, and hence we have the problem with spam bots and those sorts of things. So when we build an identity system, those are the things we're aiming to achieve, is both of those properties, unicity and singularity. So we have to look at our identifiers and consider them and see how well they achieve those properties. So that's the background on identity. The slide, back to the slide where it shows how we build an application and where Interep fits in to that application. Interep provides the identity management layer, if you like. In other words, we're interacting with identity sources, and we maintain groups with on behalf of Semaphore. So Semaphore is based on groups of identified people. Semaphore provides the privacy guarantees to make sure those identifiers are hidden from the public, and so your application can fit into that framework, use the privacy properties of Semaphore, and use the identity properties in the Interep layer to associate it with a unique individual in the real world. And all that's rooted in the Ethereum blockchain. So, our groups are maintained in such a way that just they're a Merkle tree, but the root of the Merkle tree is stored in the blockchain. So that's an overview of where your application, what your application will look like if you build with Interep. And Shelley, can we have the next slide, please? Okay, so let's think about the identity sources we're going to be dealing with. What we're trying to achieve is to try and we want, when we have an identifier, we want that to be associated with a unique singular individual in the real world. Real world identity is kind of a fuzzy kind of thing. It's hard to say exactly what our brain uses to identify someone. Like if we see someone in the street, maybe somewhere we're just kind of vaguely, someone we kind of vaguely know, we would identify them, but from their face or their height and body build and gait and their voice and whatever, a bit of all those characteristics. But if they've just shaved their beard, you might not recognize them straight away and those kinds of things. So, the brain's got this kind of fuzzy logic coming into play to apply identifiers. And our identities, our real world identities, are mirrored in our interactions in the digital world, particularly like social media. Every time we put a comment there, or a picture of your lunch, or any kind of content in social media, you're kind of adding to your story. You're adding to your digital identity, borrowing from your real world. So what we're really doing with Interep is making use of that property to utilize digital identifiers that we have in things like our social media platforms. And so we're building that link from the real world to the digital world in Web2 applications, and then we bridge that over to our Web3 applications so that we have that link, that chain running through the whole process. But of course, in the digital world, even Web2 world, let alone Web3, that problem of sock puppets and bots is something we need to overcome. So we need, when we look at our digital identity sources, we need to find ways to filter out those bots. So next slide, please. Let's think about the sources we're using. These are really just samples of the sources we could potentially use. So the way we've built Interep so far, we've looked at the kind of things we can use for identity, and we've really built kind of proof of concepts around each of those things, with the idea that this can be used if an application has a particular identity source in mind, then they just borrow from the ones we've built and build it. It should be a small increment from what we've built. So we have existing identity sources based on Twitter and Reddit and GitHub. So those sources have a few handy things that we that lend themselves to using them for this purpose. Think about Twitter. Twitter is prone to bots. There's plenty of Twitter bots out there. So we can't just use any old Twitter ID. So we apply some rules. But we have OAuth. In all of these sources, we have OAuth that we can link an individual to make sure they control a particular handle. And then we can look at their profile, and using the APIs, and we can make an assessment on whether we think that's a real person or a bot. Twitter is particularly useful in that respect because you can run Botometer. You can run it yourself if you go to Botometer. I forget what the URL is, but Google it, and put in your profile and see what your score is, and see whether it thinks you're a bot or not. And yeah, it'd be interesting to see what, if you're not a regular Twitter user, what your score might be. I'm not a huge Twitter user, but I do sort of have enough there to give me a pretty good score. So Botometer tells me I'm a human, which is reassuring. But that's one of the tricks we use to filter out bots. We have some basic criteria, and I think to be top tier in Twitter, you need like 7,000 followers and some other things like a blue check, and I forget the exact criteria. But number of followers, number of tweets, the length of time your account's been opened, those sorts of factors come into play. With Reddit, it's kind of similar. You have karma scores and so on. So we again have a set of criteria that applies to Reddit to place people in a tier. Tier is kind of a level of confidence we have about whether that account is a bot or a human. We'll go more into those details later on. So yeah, so these are the social media sources we've used so far. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, and in addition to those social media accounts, we have loads of sources of digital identity that we thought, yeah, we can use those to as identity sources. And they're not all great quality, but we don't insist on we don't claim to be a perfect, to perfectly identify whether someone is human or not. Even using Twitter and Botometer and everything, it's never going to be 100% perfect, but it's going to be good enough for many applications. So the other kinds of identity sources we've looked at building, and in many cases built, email. Email's a tricky one because it is easy to in some cases to have many. I mean, any individual will often have many email accounts. But if we apply some extra rules, like if it's a .edu domain, then that's given out to staff in the university, and there's a good chance that that's a fairly unique identifier. So let's use that. If someone can prove they own an email address, then that can be a good indication of if it's a .edu email address, or even a corporation. If that would be a reasonably sound indication of unique humanity. And even a Gmail, there are hurdles to overcome in obtaining a Gmail account. I think you need a unique phone number or something. So that's somewhat useful for the purpose. So yeah, email. We can prove an email address and use that as an identity source. We've thought about government authorities. Not everyone has a social media account. Not everyone has an email account. And if you think of whether your grandmother might have one of those things, maybe not. But more and more these days, governments are opening up their databases. And in particular, I'm thinking of Aadhaar in India, which is a digital identity source that is very widespread in India. Most Indians, I believe, have or are in that database, and it's like a condition if you're going to register for a school or various other things. So India has this great source of huge population and a lot of people who may not have the conventional digital conventional social media accounts and so on, but they have an Aadhaar account. So and Aadhaar opens up their API, and we could potentially use that and reach a population of a very large population that would otherwise be underserved. We haven't built those because there's a barrier to entry, so that's conceptual at this stage. And there's lots of directions we could go there. A lot of countries are opening up their IDs or their driver's license databases with APIs, so there are things we could access. Now, curated groups would be something like a Telegram group, where you could add people to that Telegram group, administrators would add them to the Telegram group, and there's our source of identity. So that administrator is vetting people that they're adding to that group. So if someone can prove they're a member of that group, then that's a source of identity with good proof of humanity that might be useful in some cases. So we can do that kind of thing. Other ID projects, there's a lot of effort going into this area, and I'm thinking of things like Bright ID and WorldCoin. WorldCoin is using biometrics to identify people. Bright ID has a different approach, but I mean they're useful databases with a good source of identity that we can integrate with. And what we're doing in those cases, Interep and Semaphore will provide the privacy aspects that might otherwise not be present in that application. And think about on-chain sources of identity. Something like a POAP NFT that's issued for a physical event is because those codes are issued person to person as you go through the door at the conference, especially if you've been to a DevCon conference. You pick up, you get your POAP. There's people walking around handing them out. So it's a person-to-person interaction. So it's a very strong guarantee of humanity. And particularly it's possible to mint that POAP NFT and then transfer it to someone else. But especially if we were to apply a rule that only POAPs that hadn't been transferred, or some rule like that, then that would be quite a strong guarantee of humanity. But in any case, it's that kind of thing is a useful identity source that might be good for some applications, and it's already on chain, so we don't. But it's easy for us to interact with. Excuse me. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. I'm going to talk a bit about Semaphore. Possibly many people here are familiar with Semaphore, but let's just go through the basics. Semaphore is based on membership sets. The members in abstract terms, members signal on a topic, but that's an abstract framework that's used in many different applications. And when we look at an application, say private voting, then with private voting, you want to guarantee that a vote has been cast by someone from an approved group, that, in other words, they're eligible to vote, and you want to guarantee that they haven't voted before. So relating that to a signal is the vote, the topic is the particular proposal that they're voting on, and so that signal or Semaphore will guarantee that they are a member of a predefined set of accounts, and they haven't voted on this topic before, so they haven't voted on that proposal before. And then it's given the identifiers are and the vote is put through a zero knowledge circuit, and using that, the identifier is kept private, but the vote is is made public and can then be used to tally the results without revealing who voted which for which way they voted. So we have those privacy guarantees. We have those guarantees that the vote hasn't been cast twice and that they are eligible to vote. So that's a classic sort of application of semaphore, but there are many others. There are whistleblower applications, or think of RLN and Unirep, and all these applications are built using the semaphore framework. Interesting, WorldCoin, which I mentioned a little earlier, is built on the semaphore framework as well. So there we have semaphore providing the zero knowledge, the privacy, and the guarantees of uniqueness, of the guarantees about not voting twice and so on. And because it's based on semaphore groups, it's easy to integrate with Interep, and have Interep manage the groups on behalf of the semaphore framework. And then we link to identity. So we're building that link to have identity built into these semaphore groups. And let's go to the next slide. Right. So what we're building with Interep is semaphore groups. We will have a group for each identity source. So Twitter has its group, and GitHub has a group, and email.edu domain has a group. An application can choose which group they belong to, or which group they want to use as their source, which one provides the right guarantees of the guarantees they need for that application, and every application is going to be slightly different in their criteria. And within one identity source, we will have tiers that represent broadly a level of confidence that the identifier is a unique human. So a gold tier in Twitter would be the strongest guarantee of humanity, and silver would be a moderate guarantee, but perhaps a larger group of people, and bronze would be a weaker guarantee, but still somewhat better than a bot. Like if the bot underscore says they're very likely to be a bot, then they'll probably not even get into the bronze group. So when interacting with the Interep application, users prove their membership they prove their ownership of the application handle, your Twitter handle, whatever, using OAuth. This is happening in the browser, in the user's environment. They sign on to Twitter. We obtain their handle. We then do an assessment to see whether which tier they're in, how much confidence do we have that that's a unique, not a tier, and on social media, then we just once you join the group, mark that account as used, account again, and start to build their or next please. Oh, okay. Okay. Okay, I'm trying to get it back. How does it sound right now? Okay. Okay. Well, yeah. So just to recap that previous slide, the first step in Interep, when using Interep, is to link to the identity source, the social media application. That's an OAuth check. That guarantees that the user controls that account, and we then mark that account as having been used. Yeah. So and during that process, once we know the OAuth, once the OAuth has gone through, we will assess the level of confidence and assign them to a tier: gold, silver, bronze. Okay. So next slide. Now, so the user has proved their membership with the ID source. We've assessed them into a tier. The next step is to, well, they're marked, that handle is marked off as having been used. And we now ask them to sign a message with their Ethereum address in their browser wallet to prove they own that Ethereum address. And from that, we construct a semaphore identifier. That link between the social media handle and the Ethereum address is kept private. The public is not aware of that link. So that's the first sort of layer of privacy that we're applying in Interep. Once we have an Ethereum address, we construct a semaphore ID commitment, and that's then used in the semaphore application. So we will mark off the social media handle as having been used, so it can't be used again. We will mark off that Ethereum address, so it can't be used, at least not in a Twitter group again. So that with those things, that's in our internal database, but that link is never made public. And with those things, we can guarantee that a user can't reuse their social media profile and create a different link with a different Ethereum account, and they can't reuse that Ethereum account, so that we know that Ethereum account is always uniquely linked to that social media handle without ever revealing the link. The interesting thing about this in the framework of a semaphore application, with a conventional plain vanilla semaphore standalone application it constructs identity commitments using a random key as generated in the user's environment. From that is constructed the identity commitment, and that's used to build the nullifiers that are then used to when using the semaphore application. So that's a standalone semaphore application, and that key is preserved on the user's environment, so when they come back to that application at a later time, they reuse that key to or reuse the identity commitment to continue using the application. What we're doing in Interep, we're taking advantage of the fact that what we can do with a browser wallet is ask an Ethereum address to sign a message to prove ownership of it, and then that stands in for the random key that was generated in conventional semaphore. And from that Ethereum address, we can construct, or from the signed message, we construct the semaphore identity commitment. So instead of constructing it from a random key, we're really building it up from the Ethereum private key. And from then on, the identity commitment and the nullifiers look much the same to the semaphore application as if they were constructed from a random key. So we kind of diverted the process to link it to an Ethereum address, and that's how we make Interep work. And so let's go to the next slide. Okay. So everything we've talked about so far with social media and email and so on is off-chain identity sources. We do have a concept of on-chain groups. With off-chain identity sources, we would construct a Merkle tree as required by semaphore, and when using the semaphore application, the user will retrieve the Merkle path and use that to prove their membership of a set. And so Interep provides those with its APIs. And that's all off chain. The only thing that's on chain there is the root of the Merkle tree. It's kept there to keep it honest. We do have this concept when we have on-chain groups such as POAP NFTs. Any other NFT could be used, I suppose, or a whitelist in a smart contract, whitelist of approved accounts, in which the data is already on chain, and so the process is going to be slightly different. So yeah, we do have a slightly different process for on-chain groups, but I'm not going to delve too much into more details on that at this point. So let's go to the next slide. Yeah, so we've built. We have our application. We have an identity source. The user has come along and done an initial sign-in to link their identity source with an Ethereum account. From that is constructed the semaphore identity commitment, and from that point on, that's a one-off process. That joining the set. From then on, the user is in the set. They can prove their membership anytime. Just retrieve the Merkle tree path and the identity commitment, and feed that into the application to use that application. So the use of the application would be if we think about an application like private voting. Every time you cast a vote on a proposal, you retrieve your identity commitment. and pass it to the application, which will verify that it's a genuine member of the set, and you'll also retrieve some nullifiers so they can use it in that vote. And that's sort of the end-to-end overview of how Interep interacts with the semaphore application. So yeah, it's a one-off sign-in process, and then reusing is just retrieving the local tree path and nullifiers and using them in the application, and that's how it goes. So let's think about the kinds of applications we can build. Private voting is kind of a sort of a classic use case for semaphore. But think about social networks, private social networks, or social networks that have some privacy guarantees. We want guarantees that a particular handle is a unique human, but we might want to have some privacy so that we don't know who that human is. We just know they're a particular member of a set. So you can build an application like that with all the privacy guarantees and so on. Anti-spam, rate limiting nullifiers is a great use case, and you can watch the talks on that to find out more about it. But yeah, that's again using the anti-Sybil properties that Interep can provide. So with anti-spam, don't necessarily want 100% guarantees of unique humanity, but you want reasonable guarantees so that someone with a bot account can't just create hundreds of accounts and abuse the application and send lots of spam. So it's going to be a useful spam filter. We could build things like fair airdrops where you want to, with an airdrop, you want to be able to, suppose you want to be able to assign an airdrop to humans, unique humans who would who have contributed to a system in some way or other, but you want to guard against those who just create a new account just to claim the airdrop. So Interep could step in there and provide guarantees of humanity. And similarly, if you have a faucet, you might want to have rate limiting, but then you're assigning to an account, you're sending the funds tokens to a particular account, and without the anti-Sybil, someone could bypass the rate limiting by just creating a new account. So we can provide the anti-Sybil properties there as well. So they're just a sample of the applications, and some of you are building using Interep, which is great, and we've spoken to some other people during Dev Connect and around that who are interested in the project. So yeah, we think it's a useful excuse me, a useful application to have in the ecosystem. I guess there are different ways that it could develop in the future. Once we have a core set of accounts that are guaranteed to be humans, we can kind of build on that and use a web of trust kind of thing, spreading out from those accounts to build quite comprehensive identity system. But those kinds of ideas are there for the future. Can we just go to the next slide, please, Charlie? In DevConnect, we did a demo at this point. I don't have that, so but if you want to, Omar's done a great little demo that shows a voting application using Interep, and you can just download that from the repo, and or else look at that video and you'll see Omar doing that demo. A neat little application that just joins a group and then casts a vote on a topic. And I think next slide. Okay, there's our links, documents, repo, and we have a Discord server. If anyone wants to chat to us there, but we also have our Interep group in the PSE Discord. At that point, I think I've said all I need to say. I'm just going to go back to the question there, wasn't there? Eureka, an idea on adding school email addresses, another type of identity source. Yeah, so school email address, yeah, that's a great source of identity because you have to, you get an account, and it's an edu domain, so it's easy to identify, and it's a reasonably good guarantee. I mean, some people might have 2 edu accounts, I suppose. So it's never going to be 100% perfect, but it's a pretty good guarantee of humanity. So yeah, that's a great one. That's one we have actually built, emails. We have thought about, we could use a similar concept with phones, do an SMS check to make sure they own that phone number. And but I mean, that's not such a great unique source because one person can have more than one phone number, but they're not going to have thousands probably. Of course, these things are always what we have to take into account is that if you put something really valuable that's based on this, then the incentives are there to abuse it. So even if we go back to that example of POAPs, I mean, POAPs are a pretty good guarantee of humanity. But if we put some application together and just said we're just using people who have POAPs from a DevCon event, or say it was DevCon or DevConnect or a physical conference, that might be a great source of humanity. But if we put something valuable at the end of that, then the incentives are there to hack it, and people would start trading, offering money for POAP NFTs, and so it would be kind of self-defeating in a way. So we have to guard against that kind of thing. Charlie, I have a question about curated groups. GitHub, Twitter are built in Interep. Yes, yeah, we have built the interfaces to Twitter and Reddit and Twitter, Reddit, and GitHub, and we've applied rules that we think make sense. Of course, you've seen our survey, and hopefully you've responded to that. We're trying to come up with a better basis for what the criteria is for each of those platforms. But yeah, so then we'll refine those criteria, and that'll be sort of an ongoing process, I imagine. But for curated groups, the one we have built is based on Telegram groups. So you put in create a Telegram group, and then the administrator of that Telegram group, anyone can do that. The administrator of the Telegram group will be the curator. They will add Telegram handles to the group, and our API will, or our application will just interact with the Telegram API to query the Telegram group membership list, and if someone can prove they have a Telegram handle, they control a Telegram handle, and they're in that list, then we can add them to the group. No questions asked. So the curator, Telegram curator, group curator, is there in the position of administering that group, and then once they can add or delete according to their add or delete members as they wish, and then once that's happened, the rest of the process is just uses our application, our semaphore groups. It would be a new semaphore group for that particular Telegram group, and then the end application can just refer to that group. So yeah, anyone can build a Telegram group and do that kind of thing. It could also be done on-chain using a smart contract, which has a white list of addresses that it will accept. It's another way of doing it. So hopefully that answers Charlie's question. Is it possible to construct composite IDs where group membership depends on various criteria from multiple identity providers? Yes. I think in that case, the way to do it would be, the thing we have to guard against is if one person has a Twitter handle and a Reddit handle, then we want to make sure they don't join 3 times. So the way we'd probably do it is have a single group. I have to think about that. With a single group that can draw from any of those sources. So we'd have to think about how we exclude those, if it's important to exclude it. Some applications might be okay with having 3 different identity commitments. But yeah, there's a catch there. I'm not sure we've totally thought that through. Yeah, but we have had the idea before. If anyone can have an AC pattern domain, maybe we can use that. Restricts with. So are we talking about an email ending in .ac? That doesn't seem to be a very good guarantee of uniqueness to me. I mean, it would be possible. It would have to look at the uniqueness guarantees in that scenario. If a user could generate multiple valid signatures for the same message from the same ETH address, could the user sign multiple times? The message is very specifically constructed. It does have the name of the group they're using, or at least not the name of the group, but the name of the identity source. So it'll be something like Twitter. And the message is just that I want to join a Twitter group or something like that. It's very specifically maintained, very specifically constructed, I should say. So one ETH address will always produce a unique signature, and we can do an ETH EC recover to find the address behind that, and that's the address we mark off. So I think we're fairly solidly preventing multiple users, multiple reuse of Ethereum accounts using that mechanism.
Can I ask a follow-up to this?
Yeah.
So, wait, do you use EC Recover like inside of Solidity?
EC Recover is it's not in Solidity. It's in so we ask MetaMask to sign the message. We construct the message. We ask MetaMask to sign it. We get the signed message, and we do EC Recover in browser JavaScript.
Oh, okay. So, something we've been wrestling with. So, ECDSA signatures aren't deterministic. They have a random value. But in MetaMask, they use the hash of the message as the random value. So theoretically, you could just use any random value and generate multiple valid ECDSA signatures for the same message. And so that's sort of a problem we've been solving in another project. And so I just wanted to see if you guys had an approach to that.
Yeah, well, I'm not too familiar with the details on that, but I should check it out.
Yeah, I can follow up and message you about this for sure.
Yeah, Omar would have those details. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, we'll follow up. Okay, so Eureka's question. I wanted to ask possible obstacles that you guys can think of. Yeah, well, as I say, we're not claiming to be 100% to provide 100% guarantees of unique humanity. Most of our identity sources, there's always going to be avenues that are really dedicated. Someone who really wants to create a second account, they'll find a way to do it. But for many applications, think of something like RLN. Yeah, that's probably okay if 1 in 1,000 do that, and they only get to do it with a handful of accounts. They're not creating thousands of accounts. Yeah, there are ways to hack it. It's never going to be perfect, but it's probably going to be good enough. Yeah, well, other obstacles. Yeah, so I mean, there's going to be obstacles. Yeah, I don't know. Sorry, I didn't catch that. Oh, yes.
Do you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is not a question, but a little bit of context that why I asked this question is, yeah, I wanted to build like a private voting system for local school community. So I wanted to like verify all this students who have school email address and connect that person digital identity as no one's email address to Ethereum address and let them vote on chain. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. So yeah, if you can find some kind of, so you could do that with a curated group, I suppose, and just put members of the community into a big Telegram group, or I don't know, hand out emails or some other way of identifying that members of that community, then the rest of it's going to fall into place. That's great.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, that's been great, everyone. Thanks for attending, and thanks, Charlie, for the slide.
Thanks for presenting. It was good.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks guys. Bye bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.